Hello, welcome back. We're going to cover chapter 28 and 29 of Numbers, and I'm going to silence my phone because I didn't do that. But I'm not going to read through all of these verses again, not because they're not important, but because they're basically a repeat of what we read in Leviticus. This is all about the Hebrew calendar and the public sacrifices. So the details are important, but they're not important to our study only because we've already covered them before. So I highly recommend you read them and notice the pattern and the types that God is showing us there. There is a way to worship God, and there's another way, His way and then the wrong way. Those are the two ways. So this is where we learn from all of that. In Numbers chapter 28, we see it starts out like this. It says, Adonai said to Moshe, give an order to the people of Israel. Tell them, you are to take care to offer me at the proper time the food presented to me as offerings made by fire, providing a fragrant aroma to me. Tell them, this is the offering made by fire that you are to bring to Adonai, male lambs in their first year and without defect, 2 daily as a regular burnt offering. Offer the one lamb in the morning and the other lamb at dusk, along with 2 quarts of fine flour as grain offering mixed with 1 quart of oil from pressed olives. So he tells them exactly how he wants them to do it. And it's expensive and it's hard and it's difficult, but shouldn't we do what he wants as opposed to what we want? That's kind of the question we ask ourselves as we read the Bible. Is what he's saying something I don't like? We can talk about that. But if he said it, we should probably do it. If he didn't, if he said don't do it, we should probably not do it. Most of the stuff is pretty clear and pretty easy. But this section also, it talks about a time when Israel would be in their own land. So right now they're still in the desert. So this is what's coming basically. And sacrifice is at the heart of biblically based worship. You know, the Torah sacrifices are pictures and patterns of what we're supposed to do, but they're also prophetic of a time when the Messiah would come and fulfill the purposes of all those sacrifices. So sometimes whenever you say, you know, Jesus has paid the penalty for my sins, you don't fully understand that if you don't understand what he's fulfilling, because the effort that it took to maintain a right relationship with God was enormous. It took all your time up. We wander by a church once or twice a month for an hour, as long as they have donuts, coffee, and music we like, and we call that worship. I'm just saying that's not God ordained worship, because he tells us it sacrifices at the heart of it. So those worshipers' sacrifices and those priests understood the huge picture of appeasing God, who was offended by the sin of his people. That's why they were doing it, not because he said do it, but because they sinned and they wanted to appease him. So uh, they understood the details of all these rituals. The doing brought the understanding of why. Part of the reason we don't get the full scope is because we don't actually do anything. We go in, sit down in a comfortable chair and air conditioning and good lighting, and then we leave. And we don't actually do anything. We don't have any skin in the game. So the doing really brought the understanding of why. So it's like being a parent. It's in the doing that you understand. Why can't you stay up late every night? Well, it's because the kid in the morning is miserable and can't function. So we put this rule in place to make you go to sleep so you're successful the next day, not to oppress you, not to hurt you. God didn't do it so you wouldn't be happy. He did it because he knew you needed whatever he put in place for the next thing. So followers of the Torah understand how expensive and bloody and painful atonement is. It took a lot. You know, they understood that there are different levels of offending Yahweh too. You know, they understood that there are some sins that cannot be atoned for. So they saw the scope of the sacrificial system. They understood that sin and holiness are connected and they're very complex. They understood that you could not separate your life from your faith. They could not behave one way 6 days a week and then another on the Sabbath. They didn't see it that way. They lived their life the same every day. And, the idea that you would have one set of morals in business and another at home and another at synagogue just didn't make any sense to them. That concept didn't land. So the Bible puts sacrifice at the center, the focal point, the heart of worship. So there's a great song a very popular song, it says, coming back to the heart of worship. What is the heart of worship? It's sacrifice. It's not singing louder. It's not a bigger group. It's not better singers. It's sacrifice. What are we giving to worship him? So the church makes Yeshua's sacrifice the focal point of worship. We focus on the cross. We focus on what he did. And not that what he did isn't vital. It is. But also, what we see is his sacrifice. What's ours? What are we giving to this? I am saying we cannot grasp the meaning of God's sacrificial system unless we see it as valid and worth understanding. You can't understand what Jesus did if you're not willing to study what the sacrificial system was. Because if he fulfilled something you don't understand, what difference does it make? How could you possibly get the full scope of that? So, sometimes we sip juice and eat a little piece of bread and act like we understand his sacrifice. And, I think that's naive at best. But verse 1 states that the rituals and sacrifices and feasts are to be done with precision. He's a God of order. It's not chaos. There are few options. And when there are, it's usually for the poor. It's not just because, hey, I don't want to do it that way. I'm going to do it this way. And we do that all the time. I don't like this commandment. I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to ignore this one and call this. Sacrifices are made daily and on Shabbat, the Sabbath, and there are 30 days each year marked for special ritual sacrifices. So the offerings are cumulative too. They all add up. So if New Year's falls on a Sabbath offering, they have the daily offering, the Sabbath offering, the new moon offering, and the New Year offering. So the calendar is in descending importance too. Daily, then Sabbath, and then new moon. Then the sacrifices for festivals are in order, starting with Passover. So all animals that are mentioned in this are male. And the number 7 is important. So as we studied Leviticus, we talked a lot about that in the ritual. It's the same thing here. It's being repeated to help us learn the pattern and the principles there. There are other occurrences, the 7 biblical festivals, the 7-day unleavened bread, the Sukkot festivals, and the many festivals that happen in the 7th month, the 7 festival days in addition to Sabbath. So there's a lot of fun ritual party feast things that God's put into place, and we just totally ignore it because we think it's too hard. So the bulls required for Sukkot add up to 70, 7 times 10. The number of lambs is 7 times 7, 7 times 7 times 2. The number of rams is 14, 7 times 2, and goats is 7. So that's why we see that the number of 7 is very important. It's the number of completion and wholeness. The everyday offering in Hebrew is tamid. They believed that as long as the tamid was observed, the walls of Jerusalem would stand and that the Lord would protect them. So tamid is Tamid. There are several kinds of sacrifices. Virtually all cultures sacrificed to the gods in some way or another. The food was to feed those gods, was the kind of concept. The Israelite purpose was to acknowledge that he provides this food. So the libation offering, the wine offering is shekar, Shekhar. Not just wine, but strong wine, what we would probably call whiskey or liquor. So verse 11 begins the new moon, which marks the end of 1 month. And it was an important festival celebrated by all the families, seen by a large number of the sacrificial rams that are offered. There's 7 of them. So it was a big festival. So the protocol for the new system is primarily in the book of Ezekiel. It's the renewed sacrifice in the renewing of sacrifices. The question is it a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it seems likely that God will see it as a good and required thing. I'm not positive about that, but that's kind of my theory so far. Numbers deal with the time after Israel has conquered Canaan. So these are all going to be in effect. But one of the differences is it is the worshipers who are to provide the tamid, the sacrifice in the Ezekiel version. I think it has to do with, since the Messiah, no additional atonement is needed. So in the Torah system, it was the priest's sacrifice that obtained atonement. So these are public sacrifices at the tent. The priesthood is doing a lot of this. So people had to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem for this. So you're thinking, okay, what did you just teach me there? Well, one of the things you learned is that sacrifice is at the heart of worship, and it costs a lot for the average person to do this. And when we show up at church once a month, once every couple of months, we're not putting any sacrifice into it. So Numbers 29 is pretty similar. I'm not going to read it either, mostly because it's stuff we've already covered. It talks about all the different festivals and the timing and the calendar and that kind of thing. It's important, but it's not important to our study. So that's why I'm skipping it. But I'm not skipping it. We're going to talk about it. I'm just not going to read it all details to you. So we're going to hit the highlights because, like I said, most of the details are covered in Leviticus, and we studied that. You can go back and watch that one. But we had 3 sacred feasts in the first month, 3 in the 7th month, and 1 in between. So when you ask yourself, why don't we do this? I mean, here's 7 feasts we could be having every year that God told us to have. The only reason we don't do it is because the world tells us not to do it. We don't need to do it anymore. So the 7th month is the Sabbath month. Not an entire month of rest, but it is the 7th cycle of the moon. So first day of the 7th month is called Rosh Hashanah, meaning the head of the year. It's the Jewish New Year. We covered that in Leviticus too. But this is the most sober and joyous feast of the 7 feasts, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. One day the high priest was permitted to enter the Holy of Holies, to sprinkle blood on the mercy seat to cleanse it and purify it from a year's worth of human contact. The celebration is confined to the temple and performed by the high priest. Ordinary Hebrews don't go to temple on this day. Several days leading up to Yom Kippur, there's fasting and praying and contemplating your sins before God. And then on Yom Kippur, atonement is attained. The people are forgiven and they can move forward without their sins hanging over their heads. So this is a time of self-denial. No food, no drink, no sex. It's basically you just take some time out. The 10 days between Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur are called the High Holy Days. The Feast of Sukkot is the last of the pilgrimage feast. Now ask yourself, how come you know about Easter and you know about different Catholic celebrations, but you don't know about the ones in the Bible? Makes you wonder. Okay, the amount and types of sacrifices tell us how important it is. 5 times as many bulls and 2 times as many lambs and rams. So the Feast of Sukkot, that's obviously a really big deal. On the surface, this festival is about giving thanks, but it's also about the final ingathering of those who have trusted Yeshua. So there's a lot of foreshadowing there that we'll see in the New Testament when the Holy Spirit came on Pentecost, as we call it in the Greek. The pilgrims recognized this and modeled thanksgiving after this. That was their point of having that dinner, that Sukkot dinner. This feast has a unique schedule of ritual sacrifice. It begins on the first day with 13 bulls, and then over 7 days, the sacrifice is reduced by 1 each day. Now, it's my opinion the 13 signifies the 12 tribes plus Levi, the priestly tribe. That's my theory. So we have a rejoining of Levi with Israel, something that is probably going to occur in the millennial kingdom when Jesus comes back. So what are we studying all of that for? Well, keep in mind, God put certain things in place for us to rest and enjoy each other and worship Him and take time out. Meanwhile, we say, well, I don't have any time off. I have to work. Who's making that choice? Well, The world is. The world's deciding to ignore what God said. Take some time off. Spend some time loving and worshiping God, and I promise you won't be defeated. I'm so proud of you for studying this. I'm so proud of you for making it almost to chapter 30 of the book of Numbers, which we'll cover next time. Love God, love people, and change the world.